Okay, so good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us to talk about the entrepreneur's perspective and how AI is transforming contracting and careers. If you've joined us before, you'll know who I am. But if it is your first time, hello, my name is Nicoletta, and I'm the head of events for AI and Law Club, a BPP University student led club exploring the intersection of artificial intelligence, law, and ethics. Now, today marks our third event since the inception of the club and our first ever and our first for 2026. So that's really exciting. I always like to start off with a few housekeeping rules. So I will be doing the same today. Firstly, please note that this session is being recorded and will likely be posted on our social media platforms. So if you prefer not to appear in the recording, do feel free to keep your camera off. Okay. We You will have to have enabled cameras by us anyway. Now we will have a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation where you'll be welcome to engage with our speaker directly. So if you're comfortable, you can turn on your mic and camera to ask your questions. So just pop your virtual hand up. But if you prefer to stay anonymous or if you feel shy a little bit today, you can also pop your question into the chat and we'll go through them as we go along. Now, until then, I would like to ask you to please keep your cameras and microphones off during the duration of our speaker's presentation. Now, and also before we dive in, I'd like to just pass it on quickly to Daniel, the founder and president of AI and Law Club, because he's got a few exciting things that he'd like to share with all of you. So, Daniel, pass it on to you for a couple of minutes.
Thanks, Nikkei. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel, and I'm the president of the AI Law Club. So before we begin, I'd like to thank Tianlu for taking the time to join us this evening. We're very grateful to have you with us and really appreciate you sharing your experience from building and working on AI-driven contracting tools. We also hope this discussion will be genuinely useful for our members who are interested in how AI is being applied in legal practice and product development. I also wanted to briefly mention a club update. We'll soon be opening elections for 2 vacant committee positions, secretary and deputy editor-in-chief of our blog. Both roles are good opportunities to get involved in the running of the society and in shaping our written output. Further details will be shared on our social media channels and by email shortly, so please keep an eye out and consider applying. So with that, I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you,
All right.
Daniel. Sorry, Tianlu.
Sorry.
If Daniel, if we can have some links perhaps in the chat box as well, with where people can go and apply for the 2 positions, that would be great.
Yeah, sure, I'll do that. But so the details will be shared on our social media channels and by email. But
well,
yeah,
yeah,
I'll
super.
still try to post the information on this.
Lovely. Thank you. So now on to the highlight of the evening, our speaker, Tianlu, joining us all the way from Singapore. Just a quick note about Tianlu. So he's an Oxford graduate and a former contract review AI product owner turned legal tech entrepreneur who is now building solutions that address real user needs. Tianlu will take us this evening behind the scenes of AI power contract, what's now possible, what's changing, and how lawyers are adapting their workflows with these tools. He'll also share his journey into entrepreneurship, how agentic AI is redefining product development, and how forward-thinking lawyers and technologists can seize the moment. Tianlu, selamat malam dan selamat datang. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks, Daniel and Nico, for inviting and organizing this. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm just going to bring my slides on screen. Give me one moment. And voila, there we go. Okay. So as mentioned, my name is Tianlu. You can call me Q. That's how I introduce myself around. I used to be a product manager at ThoughtRiver, which provides an AI solution that helps lawyers to review commercial contracts. And in that capacity, I have worked with both the lawyers who use the solution as well as the engineers who built them. So today I will share with you a bit of how that works, discuss some real life case studies, and share some insights. So right now, I am also in the process of building my own legal tech solutions for lawyers. And I will share with you the motivations and opportunities which have led me here as well. Okay. So, can you see my slides changing? Okay, great. So what is contract review? We begin with looking at the contract lifecycle as a whole. So I believe all of you here, you have seen what a contract is, right? You know, those long pages when you sign up for a new software, just tell you to, you know, sign here and accept, and then you sell away or use the data. So those contracts. So in the commercial world, they usually follow this life cycle here, in which the lawyer will draft the first version of a contract. Usually, most of the time, you will have templates lying about, and indeed, there are solutions, right, that help you automate that creation process. So you won't really be drafting from scratch. And actually, the majority of the contracts going through mature businesses, they typically come from renewals. So at the start of a deal, I will sign a master agreement with you to set out the matters that should not change from year to year, so that every time we renew the deal, we're just making minor updates to the terms there. And that brings us to review. So when you as a lawyer in a business or in-house lawyer, you receive a new contract or renewal, you will need to see if you can agree with all of the terms set up by the other party. So that's the review process. This then naturally leads on to a negotiation, right? Because rarely would you be kind of saying, oops, sorry. I'm not very used to the this navigating the slides. Let me just go all the way back. So we should be on slide 2. Oops. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, so that then brings us back to the negotiation stage, where both parties discuss until they're satisfied with all the terms of the contract. Obviously, during this process, any proposed changes to the contract terms will need to be reviewed as well. So there's this back and forth. And then finally, once everybody is happy, the contract gets signed. Or, you know, or if you're not happy, you just don't sign the contract, right? And after signing the contract, the storage phase is important as well, because you need the terms of each deal on hand to determine if each party is performing their obligations and understand your rights, you know, and, you know, what to do if something goes wrong. So there's that. Also, you might need to review contracts even after they have been signed. You know, perhaps to determine if you're complying with some new regulation or as part of some audit, such as during an M&A process. So with that, what is the AI's challenge then, so to speak, or rather, what is a lawyer looking for when he or she is asking a lawyer to asking an AI to review a contract? So I think the AI needs to do these 3 tasks well. Okay, so the focus is on business contracts, obviously, but the same principles should apply to things like leases, employment contracts, and all of that stuff. So firstly, such a solution needs to correctly identify all the exact legal terms that are present or absent in the contract, because that's quite self-explanatory. Secondly, you need to bring them to the user's attention effectively for decision and intervention. You don't want to bombard the user with too much noise and confuse them and slow them down. And so, for example, when you, and this applies to everything AI, right? If you do a Google search, you just want to see relevant results. You don't want to see, 50 search results thrown to you on the first page that's not relevant and confuses you. And number 3, it needs to be able to edit the contract wording as required, or at least suggest an edit to the contract wording. That's problematic, right? So some of you may know this as redlining. It's a bit like track changes, but it's a bit more complicated than that. So that's the primary outcome of a contract review exercise, whether it's done by human or AI or kind of a combination of both, right? It's a list of proposed changes to the issues you want to push back against to bring to the other party's attention. Now, we can get philosophical about whether this is really what contract review or indeed negotiation is about, but that's a separate discussion. So now let's move on to the technicalities of each step. So firstly, identify. When the AI is reading through the entire contract, it needs to look at every clause and figure out what's going on and what's not going on. So for example, in this rather generic looking clause on screen, which you can typically find in a software agreement, at first glance, you can say, yeah, it's pretty obvious what the clause is trying to say. But actually, to a language model reviewing this, it's gonna need to understand additional context before it can perform a review. So firstly, it needs to understand, in this example, who's the licensor and who's the licensee. Because in many contracts, these reference names, so when the parties are addressed by something else, is a reference name. Uh, those reference names are going to be different even for the same contracts. And sometimes the same party may be referred to by different references in the same contract. And sometimes it can get super confusing, right? So it's really important for the AI to get this right. And that's because a lot of rights and obligations, they are directional. For example, if there's a payment term in the contract, which is basically, how many days do I have to pay for a good or service? And it says 3 days. Well, all right then, if I'm the seller, that's super favorable. But if I'm the buyer, then it's not, right? And I would like the AI to point that out to me to change it to something more reasonable. So there's that. And in addition, it must understand any definitions that are used in each of these clauses. So you see here, for instance, it says software data and it refers to software data and project, which I hope is defined elsewhere in the same document, because then the AI is able to pick it out. But if it isn't, if it's in a separate document, then that's an additional layer of complexity. This is also important because obviously, depending on how, for example, software data is defined previously or elsewhere, that will influence how risky or not this clause is. So if, let's say, user financial information is included in the definition, then you absolutely do not want to license that to the other party. But if it's just your generic box standard definition, then that's usually fine. So moving on, I've mentioned that it's all about figuring out what is and what isn't going on in a contract. Okay, well then, how deep do you go? How comprehensive do you go, right? Because for the same clause, for a simple clause, you can read hundreds of things into it, and also there could be thousands of things that are missing from a contract, right? How do you deal with that? Most of this will be irrelevant, and it's going to cost a lot of time for the AI to compute. But if you don't look for these things, you run into the next two problems, right? Which are unknown unknowns and anomalies. So unknown unknowns, these are basically the things you can't really account for. There'll be new laws, new regulations, new risks, new technologies even that will create these blind spots. So actually, even with the best technology today, you still need a good lawyer to be kind of aware of these things and build these things into their contract review playbook. So, I mean, that's what they've always been doing, but that's something that's not easily replaceable by AI. And then there are anomalies, which are terms that rarely go into certain types of contracts, and the AI needs to pick these up as well. For example, I could add a clause into a software agreement that says you have to send me chocolate bars every week as part of our agreement. And it seems very trivial and it seems just a simple mischief, but there could be another clause, a very standard clause later on that says, if you do not perform any one of the obligations previously mentioned, I have a right to terminate the contract. So if you forget to send me any chocolate bars, then actually I have a good reason to terminate the contract legally. So these things are risky as well. And a language model needs to understand that, yeah, that's not normal for such a contract, and it needs to be flagged to the user. And finally, and also I guess the most straightforward one, is the language model needs to understand legal jargon, which means you can't just slap any random LLM into a contract and hope that it all goes well. So, I mean, sometimes it does, but very often there are terms in the contract where the legal meaning, the contractual meaning, is slightly different from common use, in which case you need to work with an LLM that's actually trained on those types of contracts. And this could, this problem even exists within legal tech, because if you're working in oil and gas, for instance, you might be using a very different set of definitions as if you are operating in the telecoms industry or food and beverages. So that's something you need to be aware of. The language model needs to be aware of. And after identifying, it needs to also be able to surface the issues to the reviewer's attention. So this is what I call flagging the risks to the reviewer. So as mentioned, this is so that the reviewer can observe, analyze, decide, and intervene, okay, on the contract. And this must be done with better speed and confidence than the reviewer could have done otherwise without an AI, because otherwise, what's the point, right? So the speed part is self-explanatory. Doing faster is always better and cheaper. But the confidence side of the equation is actually just as important, and it's actually more challenging to calibrate. Because it's very easy to say, oh yes, the AI contract review, excellent, amazing, 10 times faster. But then, how reliable is it? And that's where people get tripped up. And that's when they, lots of users initially, they will kind of review the whole contract anyway. And actually that wastes more time, right? So on one end of the spectrum, you can, surf up all of the identified risks in a list and call it a day. But that doesn't save much time. The lawyer will still need to determine whether all of the contexts and variables have been accounted for, right? But on the other hand of the spectrum, if you build a solution that explains too much and surfaces just about everything it isn't fully confident about, check this, check that, check everything, then the lawyer is going to get overwhelmed and also spending more time going through the contract than before, which reduces the speed part of the equation. So obviously a balance needs to be struck, and the flagging phase is really important. So for example, I've seen the most successful models, they're able to make an informed decision based on things that are pretty standard. So, similar terms that have been negotiated before, previous dealings with the counterparty, and irrelevant laws and regulations. So these are things that they can find and indeed can be trained on and easily updated. And then the human lawyer comes in with their expertise to determine whether for this contract, okay, is it exceptional or not? If it's not exceptional, it will accept the AI's kind of conclusion, that's fine. Or is exceptional, in which case the human will intervene. So human lawyers still needs to be an expert in their field. They don't lose their jobs, that's great. And you also don't kind of end up spending magnitudes more time and money training an AI model to reason, 100% of the way there. So it's like a combination of both. And this will kind of come up in some of the case studies we'll see later. And then finally, you need to be able to kind of edit based on the changes you have surfaced, right? The AI needs to be able to do that. So it sounds straightforward, but you don't want the AI to simply delete every clause that needs to be changed and print alternatives below. It's a terrible idea, not just because it's not clear to the other party what exactly you're pushing back against, but also because it will make you seem really aggressive with the changes. I mean, some companies do that if there's the huge disparity in their negotiation power, but generally people don't do that, right? And this will actually result in wasting more time, because if you're just making big sweeping changes, chances are there'll be more back and forth in the negotiation process. I send a contract to you, you send it back to me, and we waste more time in the long run, right? So the edits that the AI needs to make, they have to be surgical. And then it must also deal with the problem of how is it going to redraft the new wording. You don't always get to use your preferred wording, and sometimes it may well be a waste of time to always chase that. If the other party drafted they drafted the contract, they have this perfectly valid termination clause, but you're not happy with the notice period duration, right? Then you just want the AI to change the number of days. You don't want it to get rid of the entire clause. And just as often, you want to use your boilerplate clause for some crucial terms in the contract. So the model needs to be able to understand, what situation is which and determine when to use what. And very often, when the decision is tough, how we do it is to just design in such that the AI provides 2 or 3 options and the human lawyer chooses from it. So very straightforward. And finally, there is also the kind of logic of the edit. I'm not sure how many of you here are kind of computer scientists, but this is like a very logical challenge as well, because if you look at this example on my screen right now, there are actually 4 changes in total that needs to be made, okay, to affect the meaning of this initial clause. And the AI must be must come up with an algorithm how to most effectively split up the clauses and where to enact each change without impacting the desired sum total. So you're basically faced with this optimization problem where you're trying to make the fewest changes to achieve the outcome you want, while providing as much clarity to the other party as possible. So all of this is actually done very well by humans these days, but it's actually quite challenging to come up with a good algorithm that can handle all of that still. Okay. And now that we've understand what the basics of what an AI contract review solution can do or is meant to do, let's look at some real life use cases or case studies in this case. So I have simplified some of these, obviously, so that I can get the point across more succinctly. And but these are indeed kind of how I've seen real companies employ ThoughtRiver back in the days, and also some of our competitors' products back in the days for improving their legal work. So the first case study is about how a legal team of this large multinational company is using ThoughtRiver. Actually, it's a fairly common use case for most such organizations, right? So to understand this, you have to understand what is a playbook. So before a company signs a contract with their counterparty or when they're negotiating a contract, most companies, they have a playbook which tells them, what can we actually agree to? So what must be in the scope, the risk allocation between the parties, the logistics, if it's delivery of goods and stuff, right? How we deal with data, how we deal with privacy, when can we terminate, how do we handle disputes and all of that. So in most businesses, they will have something akin to like a 20-page PDF, like a formal playbook for their lawyers to refer to review against. I've seen companies in which they just have a bunch of lawyers, like senior lawyers, and it's all in their heads, which is pretty dangerous because if one of them leaves the company, then there's a lot of information that's lost, right? But anyhow, most legal departments, they operate on a system that's somewhere in between. So the client in this case, they basically wants a contract solution that maps out the playbook digitally. So that 20-page PDF, you're basically teaching the AI how to review based on that. And once the contract is reviewed, the lawyer is then presented with a checklist of issues. It's literally a list, right, of all of the issues with the contract that they need to deal with. Some of them could be, yeah, this is highly risky, go and change it. Some of them could be, hey, this is unusual, you might want to look at it, right? So this is like a checklist. And the idea is the lawyer just needs to read through each item, work on it, and then they don't need to spend hours reading the entire contract. Because this checklist, as they click through each item, they are actually brought to the exact point or location of the contract where the problem is. So that saves them a ton of time. You can imagine if this is a 50-page contract, right? Instead of reading the whole thing, they just need to fix 20 issues, and that's really fast. So for experienced lawyers, this means that they do not need to hold a lot of information in their working brain or in their random access memory. So they work more efficiently, they miss fewer things. And this is actually really helpful for young junior lawyers as well, because it enables them to kind of learn the ropes. They can see how their organization's playbook work out with each issue encountered, without always having a lawyer kind of explain it to them, hey, usually in this case, we push back against this issue because blah, 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 because you're taking that coaching of the picture and replacing it just as effectively with an AI. So young lawyers, they can learn faster. And we actually designed this to leave the final check in the hands of the lawyer still. So if they're not happy with the AI's reasoning or the proposed edits, they can always just ignore it. Or if they're happy, they can click a button and the, any of the proposed edits, they get inserted automatically into the Word document. So this is a first case study, is very common bread and butter use case to improve contract review efficiency. So for the second use case, this is for a client who wants to build what they call and what I guess everyone calls a contract triage mechanism in order to better allocate the legal resources. So this is kind of oversimplifying how it actually works in the real world, but you can think of one whereby in the beginning, all of the simple agreements, the shorter ones, they will go to the junior lawyers. The complex agreements will go to the senior lawyers who will still bring some of these lawyers on to help with them with these things, right? So that they can train them to eventually become senior. And then for the larger, more important bespoke deals, they get sent to the law firm who has the expertise, resources, and experience dealing with them. So now with this AI front door solution, so the bottom half of the slide, you see that the AI will perform an initial review of all of the contracts, and it summarizes the issues that need resolving based on risk and complexity. So it does that automatically. Now, after having performed this triage, for the really simple agreements, like a non-disclosure agreement, non-disclosure agreements are basically at most 2 pages long, right? And it takes like a human 15 minutes to read. So if the AI says it's okay, actually, it doesn't even go through a lawyer. It just goes immediately back to the business team for signing immediately. So you may think, yeah, this only saves 15 minutes. It's not such a big deal. But actually, most of the time it's more than that, right? Because when the business sends the NDA over to legal, the legal team may not be free. So you might sit there for like a day or even hour or just a few hours before it goes back to the business team. But once this process is kind of short-circuited, actually, you're saving the business many, many hours per NDA, and it keeps business momentum there. And then this actually allows the junior lawyers to just deal with the tricky issues in these simpler agreements. For example, if a showstopper is encountered or something like that. So this frees up their time to then take on some of the issues from complex agreements and become more involved in them than before, which means having this review solution is actually pushing lower and mid-level lawyers to be exposed to higher value opportunities sooner and faster, which is obviously great for their kind of career progression. And because of that, it also frees up senior lawyers to have more time to dedicate to these high-risk, high-impact issues in these more complex agreements. What you would also notice, or I guess rather what I have also noticed, is that the large law firms, they're not really losing any of their big, juicy deals to AI contract review, because at the end of the day, well, nobody's going to run multi-million-dollar deals, right, through AI models. So it's kind of how it's designed. And indeed, I have seen law firms trying to build such a triage mechanism using AI contract review tools and then offering it to their clients, because this is a way to kind of capture more work from their clients, is to say, hey, put your contracts through this solution. You have a bunch of contracts you're not even reviewing properly these days anyway. And with this triage mechanism, we can at least ensure some of the risks are captured and triaged accordingly. Okay. Then moving on. So for the third use case is what we call a portfolio level analysis. So a portfolio in this case refers to all of the contracts a business has entered into. So imagine all the contracts they are now signed and live, okay? So the portfolio is basically a data. You can think of it as a database of all of the commercial obligations a company has entered into. But however, this data is very hard to get into because it's all in written words. Traditionally, outside of regulatory or audit requirements, like no sane company is going to pour hundreds and hundreds, it's like thousands of hours of human resources in, right, to sift through all of these contracts just to find patterns in them. No one does that. It's too costly, too expensive. But with AI in the picture, a lot of law firms and consultancies, they're actually experimenting with the idea of running a targeted contract review exercise over existing portfolios of agreements. So let's say you are a large consultancy and you are advising this client who has like 5,000 live contracts that they have signed, right? And no one knows what's going on in them. Like when you signed them, yeah, the lawyer who reviewed them, they know what's going on. But at this moment, nobody knows, right? No one person knows anyway. So you run these 5,000 contracts through an AI solution, which allows them to structure the unstructured contract data, which is otherwise just like alphabet soup. And this allows for ease of analysis later on, because you're structuring them into tables and all of that. And with this data, they can then proactively advise their clients, usually with some fancy charts and diagrams and all that, on any missed opportunities, negotiation patterns, potential risks, and they're not just looking at static contract data, right? They're looking at things like, whether an obligation or right exists and all that stuff. They're also looking at the wording used. They're looking at how data changes across each version of a contract during negotiation. What's the frequency of the acceptance of non-standard terms and all of that, variance in approved drafting, and where they can be consolidated. So these may sound like I'm just throwing out some jargon, right? But what this means, like, these are really valuable negotiation patterns that the business can learn from, so that they don't leave money on the table the next time they enter into a similar deal. And this is really interesting for law firms and consultancies, and because now they have data that is relevant, that is untapped into, it's very structured, and it's relatively fast to obtain. And this can help them serve their clients, to help them save time and cut costs. And actually, this is also an interesting area for the more ambitious lawyers and in-house lawyers who are looking to be more involved on the business side of things, because now they can actually proactively add value to a business conversation. You're not just someone that the CEO throws contracts at and blame, right? And when something goes on, you can actually proactively add value to a business conversation, and you have data that no one else has to back it up. So this is something interesting you can explore. Okay, so now that we have seen, the contract review problem, the desired solutions, and what people are doing, let's look at what on the user side, right? What then determines whether the product is something people will actually use? How do you build such a product? So you might be asking, okay, why should I care, right? Obviously, this is relevant if you're approaching legal tech from a builder's perspective. If you're going to become a lawyer or in-house counsel and you won't be building these tools, you'd argue, okay, right, who cares? But even as a lawyer, you will likely be involved in these innovation projects where you need to work with the tech provider to adopt and integrate these solutions for your team. In fact, I have seen many of the more younger junior lawyers be involved in this because there's the perception that, hey, the younger generations is better at using these technological tools and all that stuff. So so at that point, it's still worth keeping some of these principles in mind, right? At the end of the day, the vendors and the buyers, the lawyers and the builders in these projects, they aren't really two sides of the equation, but they're actually just the same group of people solving a problem together. Okay, so the first thing to note is the point solution versus toolbox paradigm. They are not mutually exclusive, but they're generally two strategies for tech vendors and legal tech buyers. So on the one hand, you have firms that specialize in doing one part of the contract lifecycle very well. So remember the lifecycle at the beginning. That is not to say they do not provide any other capabilities at all. In fact, I can't think of any vendor that doesn't at least provide some ancillary functions out of the box, but they win, right? Generally one or two key areas. So the good thing here is it makes you very focused and you have a very clear brand, so you can operate in a very defined market. The other approach is the toolbox approach. So you try to cover as much ground as possible by covering a wide variety of needs when they go to potential customers. You build a solution that's relevant to each stage of the life cycle. The idea behind this is that law firms, in-house departments, they all have different innovation strategies. They all start at a different place. So a vendor with a toolbox solution can go in and say, hey, look, we can start in your preferred area, and at the same time providing the assurance that the client can scale with the same vendor moving forward without having to worry about integrating tools together, right? It's like if you buy all of your household electronics from the same brand, generally it's easier to connect everything together, and the apps you use, you just need to use one app. Whereas if you have a mixture of different solution technology and solutions, it's usually quite tricky, right, to control everything easily. And that's the same for legal tech tools, because building integrations is an enormous undertaking, right? Even with the best API documentations provided and all that stuff. And I'll come back to this, right? This thing about integrations. So that's the first thing. The second thing to note is that humans are creatures of habit and organizations have inertia. So all companies, if you have worked at one, you know that they all have their preferred email or cloud or CRM provider, and sometimes quite often the same provider, right? So big guys like Microsoft, Google, Salesforce. And these players, they permeate all aspects of the modern digital working environment, right? They're everywhere. You can send an email, you type some notes, or even chatting with people, you have to use these tools. And it's all very integrated. And they have had decades to establish themselves. And most of them, they're way larger in scale than your legal tech companies. Now, I'm not saying people love or adore these companies. Most of the time you hear a lot of complaints, but it doesn't change the fact that you cannot take them out of the picture in the short run, if at all. So I will be making my life very difficult if I try to build a contract review solution that requires, this is contract review, right? Where the user needs to actually make changes to the contract. I will be making my life difficult if I force the user to use the text editor I've built, and that's not Microsoft Word. So that would be crazy. And beyond the tangible tools themselves, users are also very wedded to workflows and processes that they are used to, because people are habitual, right? And it's not because they're lazy or stupid. It's just basic psychology. It's difficult to form habits. I mean, it's the 28th of January, and some of my New Year resolution habits they aren't going well, frankly, right? So it's difficult to form habits. But then, so from these 2 points, it leads to the fatalistic conclusion that most of the time, the point solution versus toolbox debate actually is irrelevant, because the most important thing is you still need to integrate back into the existing suite of tools that the team is using, right? You need to integrate back into these bigger players, because it's very hard to get them out of the picture. Okay. So next, no two legal departments, they really do things the same way. Different companies, even different teams within the same company, they'll have different contract review playbooks, for example. They'll have different internal processes for how their contracts flow from team to team, and all of that. So, and this is, this applies not just to legal tech. For a lot of business type solutions, this is the case. For example, sales CRM tools. So current paradigm for most software providers, larger legal tech companies, they, obviously they all provide a level of configuration in their solutions, right? But they won't develop something fully customized for any one client. It's just not good business. Even if a client is willing to pay, millions for such a bespoke customization, it's not very repeatable. So yeah, but even then, this configuration, it can take quite a while. It will cause plenty of friction, and it's unavoidable with legal tech tools, because as mentioned, playbook differences need to be learned separately. What one client configure isn't going to help another client, and the difference in processes would mean integrating different sets of tools together in a different order. It can be even something as trivial as naming things differently, but all of this will make implementing software and kind of integrating them together a not so straightforward endeavor. And most of these large providers, they wouldn't even go to a small, medium-sized client, because who absorbs the configuration costs, right? The provider isn't going to absorb it, because they end up with a very small recurring revenue from these small teams. And these small teams, they're not going to spend a lot of money or time doing it, because chances are they're stretched, they're busy, and then they don't get as much efficiency gains. So what happens is these small and medium-sized law firms or teams, they get underserved. However, because of the advancement in agentic coding assistance and generally the supply of good software engineers coming up in the recent 2 to 3 years, it is actually faster and cheaper to build software. And this actually unlocks a new paradigm, which is to build full-fledged customized software. So now, to pause here, I'm not suggesting that you should go off right now and vibe code some contract review tool and sell it to the law firm down the street. You should not do that. Any ways that could go wrong. But what this means now is that most teams, you can choose to build something in-house, whether with their own engineers or by working with a dedicated team from an existing vendor. So the benefit of this approach is that you'll be working with your own kind of goals in mind, right? Like your existing solutions and future plans. So integration is more or less assured. Putting workflows together will be less convoluted or hacky compared to if you were to buy off the shelf. And you don't have to worry about data protection and IT security and all that, because chances are all of this will be on your existing cloud. So it is actually all of these factors come together to make it, to make building your own software a viable alternative for businesses compared to buying off the shelf and then configuring that. So to do this successfully, though, you really need two pillars of expertise. So someone needs to be the expert on internal processes, and is pretty much a lawyer from the team itself, and then an expert who can build it. So the expert can come from the professional services arm of established legal tech companies with their wealth of experience, or it can be from some legal tech consultancy. And indeed, it's absolutely possible for law firms or companies to hire their own engineers to build and maintain these tools. And I predict this trend will just increase, become more prevalent in the years to come. Because we know that big banks do this, right? But we haven't really heard this kick off for the big law firms yet. And actually, this plays into what I am trying to do right now. So right now, I am actually working with a team, and what we do is we build and maintain these highly customized legal tech solutions. I previously mentioned that a lot of medium-sized law firms are underserved. So we are serving just them right now because of these changes in the broader economic and technological landscape. And you can always check in with me in, I don't know, 2 years, 5 years time to see where that is. I could be completely off, or it all works out. Who knows? Okay, coming to the end. So this kind of innovation, it doesn't just happen overnight. You will hear many people saying that the legal industry is quite resistant to change. That is true, but it's not a bad thing, and certainly not unique. What I will say, though, is that for most of the interesting projects that I see are happening right now, they are the kind of what I call 3 to 5x value kind of innovation, because you're increasing the efficiency or values of existing processes by about 3 to 5 times. So this allows the team involved, both the builders and the lawyers, to develop confidence before moving on to more ambitious and disruptive projects, which is kind of on the 10 plus X side of things, at which point it becomes like a disruption, right? And I don't think anyone's there yet. There are many brilliant ideas floating around, and in some of these projects, they look like they might just get there in terms of, but in terms of outcomes, no one is really eating their competitors for lunch yet. So I think that's where we are. And when you are starting with these on the 3 to 5x innovation side of things, there are a few kind of rules generally that, or rather, I hate to call them rules, right? Just like takeaways or lessons, I think, that helped build that confidence before you move on to the more disruptive stuff. So you try to not reinvent existing tools, just try to use what people are already using and that are built well right now, and layer your solution on top of them. You shouldn't take users out of their comfort zones. So their existing tools and processes, keep them as much as you can. I mean, obviously, some of those processes will get automated away, right? So they become irrelevant. But by and large, try to make people change their habits as little of the habits as possible. And when building any products, the ease of customization and integration are what I'll call super features in this kind of in legal tech, because as mentioned before, how do you stick to those first two principles, right? Usually is by connecting your tool seamlessly with other tools that they're using. And if you're able to do this well, actually, you're going to increase user uptake really well. You will reduce the initial friction. And this kind of gives people confidence that, yeah, the technology provider knows what they're doing. The project manager in my firm, the lawyers running the innovation project, they know what they're doing, and they're not just kind of wasting my time for 3 months and then I switch back to what I was doing previously. Because otherwise, there just won't be it just won't be compelling enough for the business to kind of adopt any changes that you're trying to make. And once you're ready to truly disrupt, once you have a few proven ideas, you can and should absolutely then toss these rules aside, because at that point you'll be redefining how the legal processes should work. So with that, I have just two kind of parting words, last words. And don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. So firstly is, as mentioned in the previous slide, you're not late to the party. The ship has not sailed. Sure, you see wave after wave of innovative advances in legal tech, but I really don't think anyone has discovered the big disruptive thing yet. You will have heard of it, right? We will have heard of it. It will be like David slaying Goliath kind of scenario, or one of the Goliaths slaying all of the others. This will be big, but right now I don't think anyone has done it yet, which means in the next few years it will be super exciting, because that big disruptive push may well come from one of us. And the second thing is, because I understand some of you here, you end up joining a law firm or working in-house. My advice is to keep an open mind. Go in, truly understand the existing processes in place and the rationale for each step of it, because this would then allow you to make the right decisions with regards to selecting the right technologies, what to build, what to buy, manage the project accordingly. So I say keep an open mind, because it's quite easy, to lose sight of the big picture year after year, and then one day, you might just become the one resisting the adoption of new solutions otherwise, and you won't want that. So yeah, so actually this is, with that I will end off and we can move on to the Q&A.